So first of all, I'll just reciprocate what Michael said. Thank you all for taking the time to join me and Michael today. So what's on the agenda? Again, we've got a lot to get through. It's going to be quite hands-on. We're going to be setting up some runbooks, deploying some infrastructure, and deploying out an application. So the first thing we're going to do is actually going to take a look around my Octopus instance, my AWS instance, and some resources that I've created. So there is a lot to get through. So I've pre-configured some resources in Octopus and AWS, and we'll go through those first. We'll just check on them, make sure I've covered all that off. Next, we'll set up some variables for our CloudFormation template and our deployment pipeline. We'll then create our runbooks to spin up and tear down our AWS infrastructure. That's where we'll be using our CloudFormation steps to actually deploy our infrastructure. Once we've done the runbooks, we'll set up a deployment pipeline to deploy a Java application to Tomcat that is running on Linux. Once we've created that deployment pipeline, we'll tail that up by creating a release and deploying our application out to our new infrastructure. So we're going to go from zero infrastructure to a running application. So specifically, what are we deploying? So we're going to be deploying CloudFormation templates. Templates are in YAML. Obviously, CloudFormation come in two parts. It could either be JSON or YAML. My preference is YAML, so I'll be using that today. We'll be deploying the Pet Clinic sample Spring application, and it's packaged in two parts. So we have the Java WAR package. That's going to be the front end Spring application that we deploy to Tomcat. And we also have a Flyway database NuGet package. So we're going to be, when we deploy our application, it's going to connect to a MySQL backend. That MySQL backend is going to be a MySQL RDS instance running in AWS. And we're going to use the Flyway database package to actually migrate and run database changes in as we deploy our application out. So what I'm going to do, let's come out of here. We'll go into our demo. The first thing I'm going to do, quickly just show you AWS. So at the moment, I've just got a quick search on my instances for Pet Clinic that are running. We have none. So a couple of things I've created in AWS. I've created a VPC subnet attached to that VPC, a security group, and an SSH key pair. Now we are going to be using the same VPC and subnet IDs and security groups across everything we do today. Probably not best practice. However, just for this webinar, we're going to use ones that I've already pre-configured. So in terms of Octopus, we've got no projects currently created. However, if I jump into infrastructure, just 1 second. We can see I've already created the development, test, and production environments. They're the environments we're going to use today. We've got 0 deployment targets. They'll be created when we run our runbooks. I've created an AWS account. This account is going to be used to authenticate with AWS as we use steps like deploy CloudFormation template and AWS CLI script. If I jump over to library, I've already uploaded our application packages. So we've got the Pet Clinic Flyway migration package, and I also have the Pet Clinic web front end that will deploy out to Tomcat. And lastly, we've got variable sets. So if I just jump into this variable set here, global. Variable sets are a great way of grouping up common variables that you use across different projects. We are going to create some project level variables. I've created the global variable set. So first of all, I've got AWS account, API, the Octopus API key, the server URL, some information on the space that I'm using, and the Octopus thumbprint. You'll see where these are used as I progress through the demonstration. Another thing to note, I am using one AWS account to deploy my application to development, test, and production. Um, you're more than likely going to have different AWS deployment accounts for each environment for security reasons, and you can do that. You can create multiple accounts and just assign scopes to different accounts. We're just going to use a single account today. And I'll jump over to projects. What I'll do, I'm just going to show you some of the other resources that we're using today. So we are using CloudFormation to create our infrastructure. And the first template we've got in here, so the first resource, we've got two CloudFormation templates, one to deploy an EC2 web machine, and the second one to create a MySQL RDS instance in AWS. So let's jump back into the EC2 web instance. You can see here we've got parameters for the CloudFormation template, and we've got some default values for each of these parameters. What you can see, I've created placeholders for Octopus variables. So we're going to create some project variables to replace these values in this template. If I just scroll down, we can see the CloudFormation template where it creates the EC2 instance. Also, with CloudFormation templates, you can run scripts inside the user data field. So when you deploy a new EC2 machine, you want to set up the machine for its function or its purpose. In my case, we need to install the Octopus tentacle. So we can see here we've got some bash variables and values for that. Again, Octopus placeholders. We can see I created the global variable set, and that's where they're going to come into play. Global Octopus thumbprint as an example there. The script itself installs PowerShell, ASP.NET Core runtimes, then installs the Octopus tentacle, then registers that tentacle with my Octopus instance. Jumping over to MySQL. Same again, another CloudFormation template. However, this time it's going to be creating an AWS RDS DB instance instead. Well, we can see the common theme here. I've replaced the default values with Octopus variable placeholders. So we need to create variables for these. So I'm going to go ahead, just move that across. Okay. So the first thing we need to do is create our project. A project is going to be the grouping for our runbooks, our variables, and our deployment process. I want to go with the application name we're deploying today. So that's going to be Pet Clinic. So the first thing we're going to do is create our variables. But before we go and start creating the project level variables, I actually need to include the variable set that I created earlier, which is global. Let's save that. Those variables can now be used in our runbooks and our deployment process. So now we need to create the variables that we saw in our CloudFormation template. The first thing we need is project AWS region ID. Anything we do with AWS when we're deploying or running the AWS CLI scripts, we need to pass in a region ID. And today we are using US2. That one is definitely going to come in handy as we start building out our runbooks and deployment process. Add that to the list. Next one is our project's AWS security group. So as I mentioned, we've got a security group parameter in the CloudFormation template, and we're going to use one that's pre-existing. What I do is just change the type of this to sensitive. It's good practice to keep items like this encrypted. Go ahead and add to the list. Next is the AWS subnet. Again, I want to make this sensitive. Put that value in there. Next was the SSH key pair. So when you're deploying an EC2 machine, you need to create an SSH key pair. Again, I've already got one, and that's another value that I want to make sensitive. That's the list. Okay, the next two variables, we're deploying two CloudFormation stacks, one for the EC2, one for the MySQL RDS instance. So we need to give them stack names for AWS. So first stack name is the EC2 web stack. I've got a value here. What I'll do is call it Pet Clinic web and the Octopus environment name. So as I run a runbook for each environment, it will place the Octopus environment name with the environment I'm running that for. It's a list. Pretty similar for the MySQL stack. It's going to be Pet Clinic database MySQL and the environment name. Add that to the list. And lastly, for EC2 and CloudFormation, when we deploy an EC2 instance, we need to provide an AMI. An AMI is an ID for the operating system that you're going to deploy, or the kind of EC2 instance type you want to deploy. And these AMI IDs change per region. So I've got the ID for Ubuntu. So that AMI value there is Ubuntu running 18.04 in the EU West region. That's a list. Next, we need to go ahead and create our project's database settings. So the first one is project's database connection string. I've got a connection string over here. Just open the editor, make it a little bit bigger so you can see this. You can see we've got our connection string for our MySQL database. We've got some more placeholders here for different variables, project database .server, project database name. So I'm going to go ahead and create, so I'll grab that, go ahead and create that variable. So the project database server, now I just feel a little bit different. We currently don't have the value for the server. So we're going to be using Runbooks in a second to build out our MySQL instances. And at this moment in time, I don't know what the server address is. So we're going to use something called an Octopus output variable. So I was going to copy this in here. Just 1 second to make sure. Just grab that. So what I'll do is just explain a second. So we've got Octopus action, get MySQL server address, output database endpoint. Now, in my deployment process, I'm going to create a step called get MySQL server address. In there, it's going to run a AWS CLI script step that finds me the database endpoint for my environment. And what I do is set an output variable. And this will retrieve the value of the database server. This will make a little bit more sense as we get into that portion of the demo. So I'll add that to this now and refer back to that. Next one was project's database name. We've got one here. So it's going to be Pet Clinic, again, Octopus environment.name. And the last two for database is we need a database username and a database password. So we go Octopus. And what I do is just get rid of that. And we need password. I change this to sensitive. That's the list. And the last two variables that we need are for our Tomcat installation. So I'm going to be running, let's go show my Tomcat script. So I'm going to be running a script to install Tomcat. See that there. And I'm going to I've got some placeholders there, project Tomcat username and Tomcat password. So I need to add those as variables as well. And if I'm going a little bit too quick with the scripts that I'm showing you, I'm actually going to be sending those out as part of the resources after the webinar finishes, so you'll be able to follow along and do this in your own time. So first one is we project Tomcat username. I'm going to go with Tomcat. My seems to be the go-to username I always use. Oh, yep, and take that. And we'll do password. Again, I'm going to change this to sensitive. Excellent. So that's all the variables I need well created. I'll save that. Cool. So now we can get on and create our runbooks to spin up our infrastructure. So for anyone who's not sure what runbooks are, so runbooks were introduced in version 2019-11 of Octopus, and they're great for automating routine tasks. A couple of examples of that might be a database backup, in our case installing Tomcat, cleaning up log files. And also in our case today, we're going to be using it to provision infrastructure. Now, anybody who previously used Octopus prior to runbooks, maybe saying what's the difference between a deployment process and a runbook? Now, you certainly could do all these kind of tasks using the deployment process. However, you'd have to create a version for each time you want to, let's say, do a database backup. With runbooks, you don't have to do that. Runbooks are also great for some of the new roles and permissions that we've added. So we can invite the ops team in to manage these runbooks and run these runbooks without actually giving access to the deployment process. Go ahead and create the first runbook. So the first one I want to create is spin up AWS infrastructure. I spelled that terribly. Always when I get it wrong. Hit save. We're going to start building out our runbook process. First thing, add step. So the first step I need to add is we need to deploy our CloudFormation templates. Go to AWS, deploy an AWS CloudFormation template. Change the name of this to deploy. So we'll deploy the MySQL template first. Go to the server. Now it's giving us some options to authenticate with AWS. So first we're going to use the Octopus account variable that we created earlier. It's going to ask for a region. We create that region variable. And also a stack name, and we create that as well. A couple of options here. One that we've got ticked is wait for completion. So we can, when this is ticked, Octopus will deploy the CloudFormation template to AWS CloudFormation. It'll also wait for the stack to actually finish completing deploying the resources. We're going to leave this ticked today because we want to be aware of when we can actually deploy our software to AWS. So the template, we can either use source code or we can use a file instead of package. I haven't pre-packaged them. It's the templates I showed you earlier. So what I'm going to do is add source code. I'm going to go ahead and grab my YAML template. You can see that's the one. So we're creating a database instance. You can see all these Octopus placeholders that we've just created variables for. Hit done. We can see here, Octopus is taking the parameters from the template and giving them as options here for us. So you can change the values here. We're going to leave those as default values because we've created the variables for them already. Next, I'm going to deploy our EC2 CloudFormation template. Again, deploy AWS CloudFormation template. Deploy. Again, I'm going to use the same AWS account, region, and CloudFormation stack. It's going to be the web stack name. And add the source code. So I'm going to get the YAML template created earlier. Go and hit done. And we can see the parameters again from our YAML template inside Octopus. So what I'm going to do is quickly show you. So if I just go to edit that source code again, we can see here on the parameter instance type, in CloudFormation, we can set a list of allowed values. And this instance type is the size of the machine that we want to deploy. You can see we've got all these different sizes down here. I just hit cancel and go to this instance type. Octopus actually gives these in the drop down for us, so I can just easily change that here. I'm going to change that to T2 medium, gives a little bit more power than the micro. Okay, so the next step that we need to add is we need to actually check to make sure the deployment target is registered successfully. So when I deploy EC2 instance, we have that script running, that registered tentacle. And later on down the line in this runbook, we're going to be installing Tomcat. Before I install Tomcat, I want to make sure that the EC2 instance is deployed and it's in my infrastructure. So what I do is wait. We have a library step template already for this. What this is going to do, it's going to deploy these two instances, and when it gets onto this step, it's going to wait for the tentacles to be registered in my Octopus instance. Right, so tentacle. Run that on the Octopus server. Write an environment name. Display name. So the display name I've used for the tentacle in the script is the same as the stack name of the EC2 instance. So it's handy to create one variable for that. The role I've given a tentacle is pet clinic web. And we need the URL and API key. Well, I've created those global variables earlier. So let's press server URL and API key. Cool. So the next step, when I create this runbook and I first run it, there's going to be no deployment targets because we won't have created the MySQL instance or the EC2 instance. So what we need to do during the runbook process is actually check for new machines that have been added to all the Octopus infrastructure. We can do this with a template provided by Octopus called health check. I can leave the name as is. That's pretty descriptive enough for me. So it's going to run it on behalf of the pet clinic role. So pet clinic-web. That's going to put connection only test. And if you look here, new deployment targets is the part that we want most out of this step, to include any new targets in the deployment that it finds. That's cool. And then the last step is we're going to install Tomcat. So we're going to use a script step to do that. So I'll change that to install Tomcat. Again, it's going to run on the pet clinic web. Now you'll see I'm having to retype these. It's because at the moment the infrastructure is not currently built. So I know it's going to be pet clinic. Oh, again, that's a new role. And I'm going to be using a bash script, and it's the same script I showed you earlier. Excellent. And that's my runbook for spinning up my infrastructure. What I do, these two can run in parallel with each of these steps. I was going to go back into deploy EC2. By default, deploy EC2 instance will wait for deploy MySQL instance to finish. I've had to change that down here to run in parallel with previous step. And I can also do that for wait for tentacle. The reason why I'm doing that, the deploy MySQL instance takes 7 or 8 minutes to deploy, whereas the EC2 instance only takes a few minutes. Go ahead and hit save. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to run this now and create our infrastructure for all 3 of our environments. I'm going to go back to projects while that's running. Let's give this a second. I think it's going to take a while. I just kicked off all those tasks. Hopefully see in AWS. So what I do is create a second runbook. So I'll turn down our infrastructure. Spell that out again. Hit save. Let's So make sure those runbooks are actually deploying infrastructure out. Okay, so we should see. Yeah, we can see in AWS now it's built those machines. So I'm going to happily just let that run through and go back to doing the teardown infrastructure runbook. So the first thing we need to do is find our deployment process, add a new step. What we need to do is delete the tentacle from our infrastructure in Octopus, and we also need to delete the 2 CloudFormation stack templates that we've built. So the first thing I'd do is run a script step, run a script, and I'll call that delete tentacle. Well, not on the Octopus server. And I have a PowerShell script already to delete a tentacle. We've heard, see there, variables here. I'm using the project variables and global variables that we created earlier. It's going to go and look at the Octopus API for any machines matching the EC2 web stack name, and then delete those for that particular environment. Done. Next step is going to be to delete our first CloudFormation template. So we can see here, we can do AWS, delete an AWS CloudFormation stack. Delete my SQL instance. Okay, we need an account for this. We've got that already, a region. Now I'm really glad we created a variable for a region, so we're using this quite a lot now. CloudFormation stack name is going to be our MySQL stack we want to delete. This time, I want to take away for completion. I don't need Octopus to keep a task active when it's deleting. Once Octopus has confirmed or sent the delete CloudFormation stack over to AWS and it's been validated, AWS behind the scenes will go ahead and delete those resources. Add the final step to this runbook, which is going to be delete our EC2 CloudFormation stack. EC2 instance, again, need the account variable and the region and the stack name. And I'll take wait for completion again. Hit save. Cool. So we've got both runbooks, spin up infrastructure and tear down. We're going to come back to tear down a little bit later on after we've deployed our application. I've go in here, you can still see these still going. But if I go into infrastructure, we should see listing tentacles now registered. So we've got our development, test, and production PetClinic web applications ready to be deployed to. I'm going to PetClinic, and what we're going to start doing now is defining our deployment process. Now, the first step I'm going to add a manual intervention step. So before I deploy to production, I want to get permission off a secondary team before we approve the deployment. So we've got a nice step for that, which is called manual intervention. Deployment approval. Instructions to the team that will be approving it. Please approve my deployment to production. They can use variables inside here to make this a little bit more descriptive. Choose a team that's responsible for actioning this manual step. I'm going to choose Octopus administrators. There we go. I am part of the Octopus administrators, so I will be approving my own deployment today. In terms of run conditions, so we only want this to run for a particular environment. So if we come down to conditions here, I can set this to only run for production. I'm not too worried about getting approval or deploying to development or test for production. I am. Okay, so the second step is I'm going to go back to the variable for the database server. So I'm just going to just, in new tab, just open the variables list. If you remember, we created this Octopus action, get my SQL Server address. So I need to create a step with this name. So go back, create a script step, an AWS. We're going to run an AWS CLI script step. Inside here, we're going to query AWS to get the MySQL endpoint address that we need to use in our deployment, and that changes per environment. So step name, we get MySQL server address. Leave all these as standard. That's count and region again. And I'm going to use the inline source code, and I've got some PowerShell here. I'll just bring this up. So what we're doing, this database endpoint variable here, we're using we put it in AWS CLI to actually query the endpoint address based on an instance identifier. And what it's going to do, we're going to use that database endpoint that we returned from AWS. And we're going to do what's called a set Octopus variable, and we give that a name and a value. So during deployment, this will have the variable inside. It won't save it to my project variables, but it will be available during the current deployment. I'll go ahead and hit done. And that's the second step. We now want to create our database. We've got a script step already for that. MySQL create database does not exist. So create database. Now, we need to run this on a machine. And normally what you'd have is some kind of database jump box or database runner machine. We're going to run the database create and changes from the web front end box. Now, that's pretty insecure, and that's only just for this webinar, just to cut down on the amount of machines that we're building. Normally, you'd have a different machine, a different role, and use like a jump box that's locked down behind a different firewall to actually run your database changes. We'll carry on, and first of all, we'll create maybe the server variable. So server, database server, username, and database password. And then lastly, database name. Okay. Database name, password, username, server. So this step is going to go ahead and create our database for us in our MySQL RDS instance. Next step, we actually need to run our Flyway database migrations package. If I search Flyway, we have a community step template that runs on Bash, created by my colleague Sean. It's going to run our database migrations package for us. This is going to create all our tables and include all our data inside our database. Deploy database changes. Again, we'll run that from the web server. So the only options we need is target URL, which is a connection string. So we need to give the package a connection string, and we created that earlier. We need a user, database username, same again, project database username, and the password. And okay, ignore these options, so now we don't need those. However, we do need to specify a package that we want to deploy. That's going to be our Pet Clinic Flyway package. Excellent. Now, the last step we need to run is we need to deploy our WAR package out to EC2 machine running Tomcat. So I'm going to search Tomcat. And we've got a template step here built by Octopus, deployed to Tomcat via the manager. Get rid of that. We'll say deploy to Tomcat. I'm going to run that on the Pet Clinic web machine. That's where it's going to deploy and host our application. Package, we're going to use the Pet Clinic web and some Tomcat deployment feature settings here. So you're gonna keep it as localhost 8080 manager because we're deploying a package onto the EC2 instance, and it's gonna connect to the Tomcat manager from there. So localhost is fine. But if you did want to do it from a remote machine, deploy the package from a remote machine, you can specify a remote URL in there. We need the management username and password. So if I just search Tomcat, we created those earlier. And Tomcat again, Tomcat password. So the context path of the Tomcat deployment, where it sits on the EC2 machine, and how it gets the application through DNS. I'm going to go /pet clinic. Deployment version. So with Tomcat, you can run multiple versions in parallel. I'm going to give this the Octopus release number. So when we create a release, it'll populate this system variable with the release number. And the last thing we need to do for the Tomcat step is actually enable different features. So we can enable features and turn them off for different steps. We actually need to do what's called substitute variables in files. So we need to tell Octopus about some files in our WAR package that we have. So inside there, I have a data source config XML. Which contains database connection settings. Those connection settings are, again, they're placeholder values for Octopus variables. So I'm just going to specify the path. So inside the package, it's classed as Spring, and it's a data source config XML. And I'm just going to replace values inside that data source config XML with our database settings. I'll go ahead and hit save. That's our deployment. All completed, our deployment pipeline completed. What I'll do is double check, make sure these runbooks have finished. So you can see development, test, and production. If I jump over to AWS again, we can see all our machines are up and running. Means we can go ahead and start deploying our application. So I'm going to go ahead and create a release. I change that to match the package version. You can do this automatically in project settings, but I'm going to do this manually for now. So great, and hit save. I'm going to apply that to development. So it's going to kick off my deployment. It's going to get the MySQL server address and populate that variable with the server address. Just give this now to run through all the steps. We can go into the task log and get a little bit more information. Not much information on that script step I ran. We can see it's created the database, it's created pet clinic development successfully. It's acquired the packages, and what that means is push the packages, Fireware package and the pet clinic web package to the Linux servers. It's run the database changes. So successfully applied 2 migrations to pet clinic development, and it's deployed our application to Tomcat. So what I'm going to do is just kick off a deployment to test. Then I'll go back into AWS and I'm going to get the development server. Now I'm going to get the public DNS. That application should now be available to me. So I'm going to go 80, not 98, 8080, that'd be a weird pot. And go pet clinic. And hopefully you'll see the Spring Pet Clinic application up and running. Make sure it's pulling data back. It is. Excellent. So we've got our development application deployed to our brand new infrastructure. It's now deploying to test. Let's deploy the last part to Tomcat. Once this is finished, we'll kick off our, there we go, kick off our deployment to production. Go ahead. The first thing we're met with is the manual intervention task. So if you remember, we created a step to only run for the production environment. And I said I'd be approving my own deployment, and here we are. I'm okay to proceed. I can proceed with that deployment. And now we've signed that off, it's going to go ahead and deploy the rest of the steps. While it's doing so, let's just close that one. Let's go to the test machine, get the DNS, Same again, it's going to be port 8080 / pet clinic, and we should have an up and running pet clinic. Yes, we have, and double check. They've got data. Excellent. Okay, so that's going to go ahead now and deploy to production. While that's running, what I'm going to do is kind of take use of some of the use the teardown runbook infrastructure we created. So we can call runbooks from the deployment process. So what you might do here, if you deployed the web Tomcat application, you might have another manual intervention that halts deployment, and on the next step, you might have a step to actually call the teardown infrastructure. So once you finish testing, development, or test, come in here, prove the deployment's continuing, and actually call the runbook to tear down the infrastructure. Another way of doing this is through triggers. So this is probably one of the coolest things about runbooks and provisioning infrastructure in any cloud, whether it's AWS or Azure. Go to add schedule trigger. So I'm going to say destroy AWS resources. Oh. What we can do in this trigger, we can specify an action. So I'm going to use we're going to specify the teardown infrastructure runbook. Let's give me a little warning here to say triggers for runbooks will only run when a publish snapshot is available. You do need to publish the runbook. So when I ran them, they were in kind of draft mode. Then you publish those runbooks to make them available to things like triggers. I want this trigger to run for development and test environment. So I want it to call teardown infrastructure, but only for development and test. We can then set up a schedule. So daily, every day. Set this to my time zone. And I'm going to change that to 7 p.m. So 7 p.m. So if somebody has spun up some new development and test infrastructure, we can allow this trigger to run every day at 7 p.m. to tear that infrastructure down. And it's a great way of saving costs on your cloud compute and getting that bill down. I know I'm 100% guilty of spinning up infrastructure and just totally forgetting about it. But using a trigger with a runbook, it really helps keep that under control. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save. So rather than making you all wait till 7 p.m. my time, which is a few hours from now, what I am going to do is go into Runbox. I'm going to actually run the teardown infrastructure manually. So I'm going to tear down the development and test infrastructure that we've just created. So yeah, it's going to go off. It's going to be really quick to do this because we're not waiting for AWS to fully delete the resources. We're not waiting for completion. What we can see it's done is deleted the tentacle, it's deleted the MySQL instance, and deleted the EC2 instance. Now, if I go into infrastructure, we can see we only have one listing tentacle left for production, so we didn't delete production. If I go into AWS, see now we've only got one EC2 machine up and running, which is production. Excellent. So one final check. Let's just go back in. We can see our production deployment is finished. If I go back into AWS, I'm jumping screens here a lot. Get that public DNS and browse to 8080 / clinic. Up and running in production. Yeah, excellent. It's all working. So a quick recap on what we've actually done. So here we've used runbooks to spin up infrastructure and tear infrastructure down. We've created a deployment pipeline to actually deploy to our new infrastructure. It's been really quick to do. And like I said, just to highlight again the trigger, using triggers to control the runbooks, just spin infrastructure up and destroy it is a great way of saving cloud resources. And with that, Michael, I do my parts over. I'll hand over to you if we've got any questions.
Awesome. Yeah, that was, wow, really, really good presentation. A lot of really great hands-on stuff. I really like the fact that, we're able to see the power of AWS, Terraform, CloudFormation, Octopus, everything all together. That was really solid. Thank you. Yeah, let me take a look at the questions here. Okay, the first one is going to be from David, and he asks, can everyone contribute to AWS steps? So like, can everybody create AWS step templates if they wanted to?
Yeah, it's a great question. What I'll do for that, so I was going to go. So we have a community library of step templates. So we have step templates built by Octopus, and we also have step templates built by our community. If we go to library.octopus.com, we can see all the different step templates that our community has contributed to. So if we go to AWS, we can see we've got users, we've got Octopus colleagues all contributing to this library. So yeah, definitely possible, and anyone using Octopus can do that.
Awesome, cool. Then we have another question here from Rachel. She asked, can you use just CloudFormation for AWS steps, or like can you use something like Terraform or any other infrastructure as code language or configuration management language?
Yeah, definitely. What I'll do, I'll jump back into my runbook and go to process. So if I go to add step, I actually have a Terraform provider in Octopus, and so rather than using AWS CloudFormation, you come in here and apply a Terraform template, and again, similar to AWS, destroy resources. So yeah, definitely possible to use Terraform to do what we've just done in AWS if Terraform is your preferred provider.
Okay, cool. And then I'm assuming with that Terraform template, you just go into infrastructure account, set up an AWS account, or can you actually do that through the template?
Yeah, so it'd be the same again. If I just come into, let's add this template, we can see here manage accounts. We can enable AWS account
Nice.
integration. I could say let's an account variable like we did with CloudFormation.
Cool, perfect. Let's see here in the Q&A. Okay, so Tom asked, can you configure Octopus to back up the infrastructure and the SQL database?
You certainly can. So if I go back to, so if I go back, disregard that, add a new step. So it totally depends on the database that you're wanting to back up. So you could just you could create a script step and add that to a runbook to back up your database. We do have some built-in steps. So one that I was working on earlier. So if I just type in backup, we can see here we've got AWS RDS SQL Server Backup, which backs up a database to S3. We've got a step template for MySQL here that I created, which backs up a MySQL database. So yeah, definitely possible to do. It's a great use case for runbooks. Why, we've all been there when somebody's asked for maybe a deserialized copy of the database. You can quickly make a backup using a runbook without having to go onto the server and do that.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Some good questions here. So Cindy asked, can you use different accounts in AWS for environment and locations in Octopus Deploy?
Yeah, so it's one of the things I covered earlier, and one of the caveats to my deployment. So I'll do, if I go to library, go to my variable sets and go to my global variable set. So if we look at the global AWS account, I've just got one account. We could set up another account and add another value to that. Oh, cancel that. And add another account if I have one in here. And then what you could do is then scope that account to a particular environment. But you can also scope that to a particular role. So you can have an account for the environment and a further account that only allows you access to deploy to particular machines with a certain function, in this case, Pet Clinic Web. So yeah, you can be as granular as you want with your AWS accounts.
Okay, cool, perfect. And then, okay, so we have a question from Sanil here. Will we have any documentation to share for this, and then would there be a hands-on lab as well?
So all the resources I've used today, so the CloudFormation templates, the scripts that I've used, so the scripts to install Tomcat, get the MySQL endpoint, delete a tentacle. I'm be sending those all out in the follow-up email tomorrow, along with the video link. In terms of hand-on labs, no plans for that, but something we can bear in mind for the future. We also have I'll just quickly show this. If we go to samples.octopus.com, anybody who's just an account can go on as a guest. I have an account. Oh, it's going to take me a while to sign in. I should only be signed into this. So let's go ahead and just sign in. Let this load up. I'll be sending this link out as part of the resources as well.
Nice.
But in here, you can see we've got samples for everything you can do in Octopus. So, for instance, I've got target. Just find Tomcat. So you can see some sample projects that are already created by us. So Pet Clinic AWS is similar to what I've just done. And come in, and we've got some examples there. So I'll be sending that link out in the follow-up email.
Okay, cool, perfect. So let's go ahead and see. We got one more question here. Mike missed some of the presentation. He's asking if he's going to get the recording. Yeah, Mike, you'll be able to get that recording. We're going to email that recording out to you. So if you signed up for the webinar, obviously, which you did, whatever email you used is what the webinar will be sent to.
Cool.
And then let's see. All right, yeah. So that looks like all the questions that we have. Adam, awesome presentation. Thank you so much for the answers. Thank you so much for the questions. And then there's going to be one final thing from me, which is going to be the list of webinars. So we do have 2 webinars coming up in September. There's going to be on the 16th, Empower Your Development Team with Real Use Monitoring and Automation Deployments. That's going to be with our very own Derek Campbell, and he will be doing that with Raygun. The second one is going to be September 30th, Empower Your Development Team with Automated Deployments and Post-Deployment Verification Testing, and that's going to be with Testery. And if you want to see any of the other events that are going on, you can just go to that link right there, octopus.com/events. And with that, thank you everybody for joining. We really appreciate it, and we'll see you again next time.
Well,